In the summer of 1956, a museum guard at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg arrived for his morning shift and walked through the galleries as he did every day. When he entered the room containing one of the museum's most treasured paintings, Rembrandt's The Return of the Prodigal Son, he stopped dead in his tracks. Something was wrong. The painting looked different. The colors seemed brighter. Details he'd never noticed before were suddenly visible. The faces had changed expression. He called his supervisor, who called the curator, who called the conservation department. Within hours, the museum was in crisis mode. But here's what makes this story truly bizarre. No one had touched the painting. It had been under constant surveillance. The gallery had been locked. The environmental controls showed no fluctuations in temperature or humidity. Security footage showed nothing unusual. Yet somehow, overnight, one of the most famous paintings in the world had transformed. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout history, certain masterpieces have changed in ways that defy explanation, altering themselves without human intervention. Today, we're going to explore these mysterious transformations and try to understand what science, art history, and sometimes sheer chance reveal about paintings that refuse to stay the same. Let me begin with what we know about paintings and how they age, because understanding the normal process makes the abnormal cases even more striking. Every painting is essentially a chemical reaction in slow motion. The materials artists use, oil paints, canvas, wood panels, varnishes, they're all organic compounds that interact with their environment continuously. Light breaks down pigments through photochemical reactions, oxygen causes oils to oxidize, humidity makes canvas expand and contract, temperature affects the flexibility of paint layers. Over decades and centuries, these processes inevitably change how a painting looks. Some changes are predictable. Oil paintings tend to yellow over time as the linseed oil in the paint oxidizes. This is why many old paintings have that warm golden tone we associate with old masters. Certain pigments fade when exposed to light. Prussian blue tends to darken. Lead white can turn black when exposed to sulfur compounds in the air. Reds made from organic materials often fade to pink or brown. These are slow, gradual processes that conservators understand and account for.
But then there are the changes that happen suddenly, dramatically, and without apparent cause. The Rembrandt incident I mentioned earlier turned out to have a rational explanation, though it took months to discover it. A nearby construction project had been vibrating the building slightly but continuously for weeks. These micro-vibrations had loosened centuries of accumulated dirt and grime from the surface of the varnish. When the construction stopped, the dirt settled differently, and the painting's appearance changed literally overnight. The Rembrandt hadn't transformed. It had been gradually cleaning itself, and the final shift was just the moment when the change became visible enough to notice. But not all cases have such neat explanations. Consider the strange case of Francisco Goya's The Colossus, painted around 1808. For nearly 2 centuries, this painting depicted a giant figure striding through clouds above a panicked landscape. Then, in 2008, exactly 200 years after its creation, something extraordinary happened. The painting began to reveal hidden details that hadn't been visible before. Conservators using infrared reflectography discovered an entirely different composition beneath the visible image. There was another giant, painted in a different pose, and beneath that, sketches of multiple figures that had been painted over. What's particularly strange is that these underlying images hadn't been visible in previous examinations. The museum had studied the painting with X-rays in the 1970s and found nothing unusual. Yet in 2008, using different technology, they found layers upon layers of hidden work. Had the painting changed, becoming more transparent over those intervening decades? Or had the earlier examinations simply missed what was there? The scientific consensus is that lead-based paints become gradually more transparent over time as the lead compounds oxidize, potentially revealing underlayers that were once completely hidden. But the timing, exactly 200 years after creation, seemed almost intentionally dramatic. Then there's the curious phenomenon of paintings that appear to change expression. The most famous example is Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Countless visitors have reported that her smile seems different depending on when you look at her. Not just from different angles, but on different days, at different times. Security guards who see the painting daily swear that her expression changes. Some days she seems more amused, other days more melancholy. Sometimes she appears to be smiling warmly. Other times, her smile seems almost mocking.
Scientists explain this as a perceptual phenomenon, rather than an actual physical change. Leonardo used a technique called sfumato, blurring the edges of forms to create ambiguity. The corners of Mona Lisa's mouth are deliberately vague, allowing our brains to interpret them differently, depending on our own emotional state, the lighting conditions, even our angle of view. The painting isn't changing. Our perception of it is changing. But try telling that to the guards who see her every day. They'll insist something about the painting itself shifts, not just how we see it. One of the most dramatic and well-documented cases of a painting changing overnight involves J.M.W. Turner's The Burning of the Houses of Lords and Commons from 1835. This magnificent painting depicts the fire that destroyed the old Palace of Westminster in 1834. Turner witnessed the fire himself and made numerous sketches on site. The finished painting shows brilliant oranges and reds, the flames reflected in the Thames, crowds of spectators silhouetted against the inferno. It's one of Turner's masterpieces, a tour de force of color and light. In 1928, nearly 100 years after Turner painted it, conservators at the Philadelphia Museum of Art noticed something disturbing. The painting was darkening, not gradually over years, but rapidly over months. The brilliant oranges were turning brown, the luminous yellows were becoming muddy, the vibrant reds were dulling to maroon. Most alarmingly, this wasn't happening uniformly. Different areas of the painting were darkening at different rates, destroying the carefully balanced composition. Within a year, the painting looked completely different from how it had appeared for its first 9 decades. Investigation revealed that Turner had experimented with a new type of red pigment, chrome red, which had only recently become available. Chrome red was initially more brilliant than traditional red pigments, which is why Turner was attracted to it. But it had a fatal flaw. When exposed to light, especially in combination with certain other pigments, chrome red underwent a chemical transformation, changing from bright orange red to dark brown. The process was slow, but cumulative. Once it began, it accelerated. And once a certain threshold was crossed, the visible change happened very quickly.
But here's what makes the Turner case particularly mysterious. Other paintings from the same period using the same pigment didn't change at the same rate. Some darkened quickly, others remained relatively stable. The chemistry was identical, but the results were wildly different. Scientists have spent decades trying to understand why. Current theory suggests that micro-variations in how the paint was mixed, how thickly it was applied, what other pigments were nearby, and even the specific environmental conditions where each painting was stored all contributed to different rates of deterioration. In other words, each painting was having its own unique chemical conversation with time, and predicting the outcome was effectively impossible. There's another category of mysterious changes that's even harder to explain. Paintings that seem to develop new details that were never there originally. The most famous case involves Hans Holbein's The Ambassadors from 1533. This remarkable painting contains the famous anamorphic skull in the foreground, a distorted image that only becomes recognizable when viewed from a sharp angle. But in recent decades, art historians have noticed other anamorphic elements in the painting that don't appear in historical descriptions or earlier photographs. Most notably, there's a subtle distortion in the floor pattern that, when viewed from a specific angle, appears to form letters or symbols. These weren't mentioned in any documentation before the 1990s. Either every observer for 450 years missed them, which seems unlikely given how thoroughly studied the painting is, or they've somehow become more visible over time. Perhaps the varnish has yellowed in a way that creates greater contrast. Perhaps the paint layers have become more translucent. Or perhaps, and this is the explanation no one wants to say out loud, perhaps they simply weren't there before and have somehow appeared. The scientific explanation for this kind of phenomenon involves the concept of pentimenti, which is Italian for repentances. These are changes that artists made during the creation of a painting, covering over one idea with another. Over time, as upper paint layers become more transparent, these covered elements can begin to show through, like ghosts emerging from beneath the surface. What appears to be a new detail appearing is actually an old detail reappearing.
But this explanation doesn't account for all cases. In 2003, conservators cleaning a Giovanni Bellini painting from 1505 discovered that an entire figure had become visible in the background, a figure that appeared in no historical records and showed up in no X-rays or infrared scans conducted before 1990. The figure wasn't painted over, it wasn't hidden beneath varnish, it was simply there, in an area that had appeared to be empty sky for 500 years. The most plausible explanation is that Bellini used a particularly unusual blue pigment that was initially opaque but became transparent over a very long period, finally revealing the figure he'd painted underneath. But why paint a figure and then completely hide it? And why did the transparency suddenly increase after 500 years? These questions remain unanswered. Then there are the cases that seem to involve not chemical changes, but almost conscious transformation. At the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, there's a painting by Gustave Moreau called The Apparition, created in 1876. It depicts Salome dancing before the severed head of John the Baptist, which appears as a glowing vision. Museum staff have long reported that the glow around the head seems brighter on certain days than others. Environmental sensors show no correlation with lighting changes or other measurable factors. Yet photographs taken of the painting on different days show measurable differences in luminosity. The explanation eventually discovered was both fascinating and mundane. Moreau had mixed a small amount of phosphorescent material into the paint for the glowing head. This material absorbed light during the day and released it slowly, creating a subtle glow. But phosphorescence is affected by humidity, temperature, and even barometric pressure. On certain days, atmospheric conditions caused the phosphorescent effect to be stronger. The painting wasn't magically changing. It was responding to its environment in a way that Moreau had intentionally built into it. He wanted the head to truly glow, to have its own light, and he'd found a way to make that happen. This raises an intriguing possibility. How many other artists built time-based or environment-responsive elements into their work intentionally? How many paintings contain hidden mechanisms for change that we haven't discovered yet? Some art historians believe this might be more common than we think, especially among artists who were also scientists or who had an interest in chemistry and optics. Leonardo da Vinci certainly knew enough about materials to create time-released effects. Rembrandt was deeply interested in how different varnishes and glazes aged. Turner obsessively experimented with new pigments. Did these artists intend for their paintings to change over time? Were they creating works that would evolve, that would look different to future generations than they did to contemporary viewers?
There's evidence to suggest that at least some artists thought about their work in these terms. Vincent van Gogh wrote letters discussing how his yellows would eventually darken and how he was painting with that future state in mind, trying to create compositions that would remain balanced even after the yellows turned brown. He was painting not just for his own time, but for a future he would never see. In a sense, every Van Gogh painting contains two compositions, the one he created and the one time would create from it. The question of restoration becomes ethically complicated in light of these considerations. When conservators restore a painting, what are they restoring it to? The way it looked when the artist finished it? The way it looked after a decade of aging? The way it looks now after centuries of change? If an artist intended for the work to change, is restoration actually destroying the artist's intent rather than preserving it? These are questions without clear answers, and different institutions have different philosophies about how to approach them. In 2012, the Prado Museum in Madrid completed a controversial restoration of Hieronymus Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights. The cleaning revealed colors that were far more vibrant than anyone had expected. The painting that had seemed dark and foreboding for centuries turned out to have been originally bright and jewel-like. The transformation was so dramatic that many viewers felt they were looking at a completely different painting. Some critics argued that the restoration had gone too far, that it had destroyed the atmospheric quality that centuries of darkened varnish had given the work. Others celebrated the revelation of Bosch's true palette. But here's the strange part. Within 5 years of the restoration, visitors began reporting that the painting seemed to be darkening again. Not uniformly, but in patches. Conservators investigated and found no deterioration of the new varnish, no environmental problems. Yet photographs confirmed that certain areas of the painting did appear darker in 2017 than they had in 2012. The current theory is that the cleaning had removed not just dirt and old varnish, but also some of the upper glazes that Bosch had applied. As the remaining original glazes continued their slow chemical evolution, interacting with light and air, they were darkening at accelerated rates now that the protective layers above them were gone. In trying to restore the painting to its original state, the conservators had actually set it on a course toward even more dramatic change.
These stories raise a profound question about the nature of art itself. We tend to think of paintings as fixed objects, unchanging records of a moment of creation. But the reality is that paintings are alive in a sense, constantly interacting with their environment, constantly changing, aging, evolving. The painting you see in the museum today is not the same painting that hung there 10 years ago. It might look the same to casual observation, but at a molecular level, it's different. Every moment of exposure to light, air, and human presence changes it slightly. Some contemporary artists have embraced this reality and made it central to their work. Ansem Kiefer intentionally uses materials that will deteriorate and change, creating paintings that are designed to evolve over decades. His use of straw, ash, clay, and lead means that his works will look completely different in 100 years than they do today. He's not fighting against time, he's collaborating with it. The painting that future generations see will be partly his creation and partly time's creation. It's a partnership between artist and entropy. But what about the cases that still defy explanation? There are paintings in museums around the world that staff swear have changed in ways that no scientific explanation can account for. A portrait whose subject seems to age, gaining subtle wrinkles and gray hair over decades. A landscape where the sky seems to darken gradually, even though spectroscopic analysis shows no change in pigment composition. A still life where fruit appears to rot imperceptibly slowly, taking on brown spots and withered texture that weren't there in earlier photographs. Are these real physical changes? Are they perceptual phenomena, products of suggestion and expectation? Are they the result of changes in museum lighting that alter how we see the paintings, even though the paintings themselves remain unchanged? Or is there something we don't yet understand about how paintings interact with time, with light, with the consciousness of observers? The honest answer is that we don't know. For every case that receives a satisfactory scientific explanation, there are others that remain mysterious.
One particularly haunting case involves a self-portrait by an unknown 18th century artist hanging in a provincial museum in France. The portrait shows a young man, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair and a confident expression. Museum records from 1893 describe it exactly this way, but photographs from 1950 show subtle differences. The hair appears to have more gray. The expression seems less confident, more weary. By 1980, the changes were undeniable. The subject looked older, sadder. The paint showed no signs of deterioration or alteration. The varnish was original, yet the portrait had aged along with the century it had witnessed. Scientific analysis in 2005 revealed something extraordinary. The artist had used an incredibly complex layering technique, applying dozens of thin glazes one over another. As these glazes aged at different rates, becoming more or less transparent according to their specific chemistry, the overall effect shifted. Features that were initially hidden beneath opaque glazes became visible. Details that were once prominent faded as overlying layers became more opaque. The portrait wasn't changing randomly. It was following a program that the artist had built into it layer by layer, a program that would cause it to age just as a human face ages. Whether this was intentional or accidental, we'll never know, but the effect is unmistakable. The painting is growing old. This suggests a possibility that's both exciting and unsettling. How many paintings contain hidden programs like this, time-released transformations that will only become apparent over centuries? How many masterpieces that we think we understand will reveal completely new aspects in 100, 200, 500 years? We might be looking at the art of the past with no idea that we're only seeing one chapter of a much longer story. The phenomenon of paintings changing overnight, specifically, rather than gradually, often comes down to threshold effects. Chemical processes happen continuously, but invisibly, until they reach a tipping point where the change suddenly becomes visible. It's like watching water evaporate from a puddle. Nothing seems to be happening for hours, and then suddenly the last bit of water disappears in an instant. The painting has been changing all along. We just didn't notice until the change crossed the threshold of visibility.
But this doesn't account for the timing. Why do these dramatic overnight changes so often happen at significant moments? The Goya revealing its hidden layers exactly 200 years after creation. The Turner darkening almost exactly a century after it was painted. A Renaissance portrait discovered to have a hidden underlayer on the 500th anniversary of the artist's birth. Coincidence? Almost certainly. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures, and we find meaning in randomness. But the coincidences are striking enough that they've generated their own mythology. Some art historians half-jokingly suggest that paintings have memory, that they somehow mark anniversaries in ways we don't understand. This is obviously not scientifically credible, but it points to a deeper truth about our relationship with art. We want paintings to be alive. We want them to change and grow. We want them to surprise us. And so we notice and remember the changes that fit meaningful patterns while forgetting the changes that are merely random. What we can say with certainty is that every painting is constantly changing, that the artwork you see today is different from the artwork that existed yesterday and will be different again tomorrow. These changes are usually imperceptible, but they're always happening. And, occasionally,
Through a combination of chemistry, physics, and sheer chance, the accumulated changes become visible all at once, and a masterpiece transforms overnight. I'd love to hear if you've ever noticed a painting that looked different on different visits to a museum. Have you experienced the uncanny feeling that an artwork has changed when you know rationally that it shouldn't have? Share your stories in the comments. And if you'd like to own reproductions of masterpieces that will stay exactly as you remember them, check out our catalog of over 500 historical artworks available with free worldwide shipping. The link is in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.